Hello and welcome to episode 119 of the Elevate Your Running podcast. I'm excited this week to chat with you about the 5 different things I wish I knew before I started running. And I think a lot of us are going to relate to this because they are all things that I've heard runners say in the past, or we talk about the past and we talk about the present, we talk about where we want to go, and what would we do differently if we were starting over as a runner. So I think it's going to be a really fun conversation, and I really would love for you to think about, what would you do if you were starting over as a runner? What would you do differently? What would you do the exact same? And I think that's actually a really cool piece to this, where we can evaluate, like, it's like for race strategies and races with athletes and runners. Anytime that they come off of a big race or any race, I ask them, well, let's talk about like what worked really well in this cycle and what didn't work in this cycle. And it's a lot of fun to be able to put together a list of like all, I call them the wins. Like, let's put together a list of all of the wins, things that we're really proud of, things that worked really well. And then hopefully it's a shorter list of things that didn't necessarily work as well as we wanted them to. And that could be anything within the training cycle. It could be mishaps in the training cycle, if someone gets sick or if someone needs to travel for work, like a lot of that can kind of shift the training a little bit depending on how available that runner is. And we do the same for race day on like what worked, what didn't work during the race, because we can always lean into the things that worked, right? And really feel good about that and knowing, yes, I want to apply that to the next training cycle. And then we can take a look at the list of things that didn't work and think, okay, this, out of my control. Couldn't do anything about it. But what is in my control? What are some things that I could have done a little bit differently for the next go around? And what are those strategies that we can really lean into to make sure that we have that a little bit more dialed in? So I think this is going to be a really cool conversation. And congratulations to anyone who is in. Hey, congratulations to you if you're listening. And congratulations if you've also like raced a spring race. We have some incredible races happening right now. We just had Boston, we just had London, back-to-back majors. That's it for the majors, folks. We had Tokyo, Boston, London in the early spring to now. And then we have Berlin, Chicago, and New York in the fall. And so it was really interesting to kind of watch the London Marathon and watch it, i.e., from the app on my phone. I had promised an athlete who was running it that I would, I'd wake up at 5 a.m. and track her. She'd be about halfway through the race. And it's always exciting when there is a race and it's happening. I get to track it. And it's one of those things where as soon as I wake up on a Sunday morning, that I'm able to track and the runner's already running. And it's a lot of fun to be able to just wake up and do that. So it was a lot of fun to do that on Sunday. And it was wild because I didn't look at the weather over the last few days going into London because I wasn't hearing anything about it. Unlike Boston, there was a lot of talk about the weather before going into Boston. And Boston's always such a coin toss on what you're going to get, that it is one of those races that you get to watch the weather as early as you want, but you also get to continue to watch the weather the days leading into the race because it is something that does change. And it changes very frequently and you never really know what you're going to get. And it ended up just being warmer. Like it had started to look that way earlier in the week. The weather then kind of dipped down and it cooled down and it looked like the high might be around 66. It's like, great. That's, not ideal, but it's a lot better than what it looked like earlier in the week. But then lo and behold, it actually went back to what it had shown earlier in the week. And it was pretty warm, full sun, no clouds. And, all last week, all I heard from the dozens of people that I tracked and just people that I'd ran it, athletes and runners that I coached and friends and people on Instagram, the first thing they talked about was the weather. Very first thing. And I know when you're leading with that, that's going to be a tough day. So it leads me to London. And London was the exact opposite. It was cold. It's very cold, overcast, really, in my opinion, really good racing weather. And it ended up being, I saw a lot of great races at London. We had the women's world record at London, and the majors are so inspiring. It's just so cool to be able to watch it, to be in it, to know people who run it, and to just feel the energy, feel their inspiration, and be inspired on how we want to show up for the rest of the year, or as long as that inspiration and motivation holds. So kudos to everyone who were in London, or maybe you had a race this weekend that wasn't the London Marathon. Congratulations to you. There was an Elevate athlete who ended up running Boston and London. And the plan originally was for her to race Boston and then go into London as a fun run, solely for the purposes of, Boston's not a great race to run to race, but if it's 6 days before your A goal marathon, that also doesn't work. So you got to kind of take that first marathon as the race. And she did an incredible job. She did the best that she could. And she worked on pacing, which was a huge needle mover for her. When we first started working together, her pacing was like, I think a lot of us, where we start out fast, we start out hot, and then we just over time get slower and slower and slower over that distance, whatever we're racing. And this athlete has really leaned into pacing and working on that. And she's demonstrated patience, and she got to run Boston. She got to run London. And it was such a cool week for her to be able to experience both races. It's her fifth star, which is also pretty cool. And she has one star left, and I'll let you guess which one that is. And it is just really remarkable what not only this runner created with intentionality and focus, but also I hope it's inspiring for you to know, like, or to be curious, like, what can I do with a little bit of an intention and a little bit of focus? Or, hey, maybe it's a whole lot of intention and a whole lot of focus, right? Depending on the day, I don't need to spend a lot of energy really leaning into a workout or leaning into a long run and nailing it and really executing it in a very strong way. And then there's other days where it's a complete opposite. And I really have to work and grind on making it happen. And I hope the latter is behind me and only good times ahead. But that's not realistic. But we can hope, we can dream, we can wish, we can manifest as much as we want. All right. So really proud of that athlete running Boston and London. All good things coming to her. And again, to anyone who raced over the weekend. So 5 things I would do if I were starting over as a runner. All right. So I think it's really important as a runner, as an athlete, as a human, that we are staying present with where we are. And there's always maybe a little bit of that glimpse looking forward, right? I think we have to have goals. We have to know where we're going. We get to know where we're going. And I think that's really important. But there is that fine balance of making sure that you're not necessarily living in the future all the time, right? Like, you want to stay present. You want to stay focused. You want to stay intentional with the day, with the training plan, where you're at right now. And it is okay to have those future goals and to think about it and to train for it, right? Whether it's like stepping stones to races, which is the way I race, or it could be big leaps and bounds and getting to where you're going a lot faster, right? But every now and again, I think that something happens, whether it's in training, maybe it's a race, or I'm having a conversation with a younger athlete, and I think, oh gosh, if I only knew what I knew now, what would I do differently? What would I change? What would I really lean into? Right. So, the first thing I would definitely do if I was starting over as a runner is I would be really intentional with my easy days. And I know that that is such a buzzkill. I get it. I get it. I really hope you're smiling and laughing and nodding your head just a little bit, because when you're starting out as a runner and you're getting like, you're kind of over that, like, that time period where maybe you're run walking, the runs are feeling hard, right? Like you've kind of built some consistency. You've built kind of this base, right? And like you're running and it feels good and you're running fast and there's no intentionality around anything that you're doing. We're going to talk about that later. But you're just getting out there and doing it. You're lacing up your shoes. You're like, don't really care what's coming through the watch. Maybe you're watching it, maybe you're not, or maybe you're like negative splitting. I know my sister does not listen to the podcast, so I can talk about her run over the weekend. And or I'm going to get a big surprise and she'll say that she's been secretly listening, but I don't think she has. And she posted like a 5 mile run on social over the weekend, and she's like, I'm so proud of my negative splits. And I'm like, girlfriend, sister, you should be, right? But it was like, it was like a fast run. And like, it was like hard gray zone running, right? Now, she doesn't train, she doesn't run consistently. She's in the gym, she cycles on Peloton, and then she throws a few runs in. And hopefully, I need to connect with her on what she's planning to do this year, if she's going to run a race with me or not. Um, but I just had to chuckle a little bit because her pace was, um, oh gosh, I think she averaged like 8:20 or something. And I think, oh, that's great, right? Like she's just out there doing her thing. But I'm like, I know that that was like a really hard run for her, a very hard run for her. And I think back to when I just started getting into running, or maybe, gosh, there was a time in my life where I was doing a lot of classes. This was like, 2016, 2017, 2018, doing a lot of classes. I would run 3, 4, maybe 3. I think 4 is being generous, 3 times a week. And like every run was like a hard run, right? Hard run. It has to feel like a hard run or it doesn't count. But I was also early in my days, like jumping into 5Ks and running races. And when I look back on that, I just kind of like shake my head and I think, oh my gosh, one, no wonder you were like injured all the time. I was injured all the time. I had niggles all the time. I was seeing a chiropractor, a sports chiropractor, like all the time. And I'm thinking back to like my younger years at like 24, 25, 26. I was going to the chiropractor and a sports doctor, sports PT, like at least twice a month, if not once a week, right? That's a lot. That is a lot if you're not going for maintenance and you're going because you have an issue, which was me. And I saw a sports doctor during my first cycle at for CIM after I like, I wouldn't say 6 weeks of my training cycle. I was seeing him twice a week. I was a mess, everyone. And I looked back to see what those runs were. I was running so fast on my easy days. And now it taken me up to, my peak was 60 miles in my first marathon build. I had come to her running about 25 to 30. And I was running 6 days a week. And I looked back on those paces and I thought, oh my gosh, I was running like 850s, 9 if it was like, I'm tired today. Now, if you know me, if you follow me on Strava now, I'm sure I talked about my pace on the podcast. And this pace, when I talk about paces today or really any week, this is like a sidebar. Please don't compare yourself to my paces, but look at it in the comparison of like the swing of pace, right? So 8:50 to 9 was like what I considered easy, right? And then my marathon pace at the time ended up being a 7:50. So like you could argue that that's like pretty accurate, right? It's over a minute slower. But like I was also seeing a sports doctor once or twice a week for 6 weeks because I was like breaking down, right? And if I would have taken those easy days slower, like right now, I can take easy days anywhere between 9:10 and 9:40 pace, right? So like, and that's like a jog, right? It just feels so easy, not every day, definitely not during cherry blossom training, but it's supposed to be a good example to show the difference of like how I train now versus how I trained during like CIM. And then let's even back that up to when I was running in my 20s. I know I did not see a 9-minute mile on my watch. I was running hard, hard. My second 5K ever, I ran at 21:04, and it was, I guess it is my third fastest 5K to date. How wild is that? That's just a fun fact. Um, yeah, just a fun fact. We'll talk about that maybe in a month or so. And I think it's really interesting how we can just push, 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 and we see the signs, right? I was going to the doctor, I was going to a PT, I was going to a chiro. No one was telling me to slow down, and nor did I want to slow down, right? And I think that that's kind of the biggest hurdle for any runner is finding that balance and understanding the why behind the easy days. It's episode back in the archives, episode 25. Austin's part of that episode, great episode. And Austin's part of most of the episodes. And it was a great episode. I might revive that one and kind of give it a little refresh. But you know, the benefits of running easy and all the things that you get to create by slowing down and going out for a jog and not having any sort of expectations. I do remember when when my body started breaking down during my CIM prep in 2019, that I remember I was waking up at like 4:30 to go out for my training runs, and I would like put on random clothes. I never matched because I was in the dark. It didn't matter, right? No one was going to see me. And I would just tell myself, like, because it was all mileage based, it wasn't time based. I was like, you just have to start and shuffle, just shuffle until you get to the park, which was about a mile. And then I'd get to the park and maybe feel a little bit better. Some days I just didn't feel better. And some days that's how I got through the run, like just shuffle. And if you've trained for a marathon, if you've trained for any sort of race, you'll know that there are some training runs where you just don't warm up, or you joke that like, oh, I warmed up after 6 miles. That was me. That was me hardcore. My body was like, what the heck are you doing to it? It was absolutely wild, right? So eventually I slowed down a little bit because I was telling myself to just get out there and shuffle. But that was really like a forceful act. But going into running and slowing down on easy days is a great way to set yourself up for success as a newer runner, or if you're starting over as a runner. And hey, all these tips I talk about today are things you can apply to your training now, by the way. And it just sets you up for success because you're not as irritated. You're not as grumpy. There's no expectation on the pace. You can just go out there and like shuffle away if you want to. And there are some days to this day, especially Cherry Blossom 10 miler, I was sharing with Nell how much I felt like it was so similar to our first cycle together for so many reasons. And when I started talking to her about that, she looked scared. She was like, wait, what? I don't think it's supposed to feel that way. I'm like, well, it does. It feels so like my body is so fatigued. And my training runs were getting slower and slower and slower. And, yeah, there's days where I still think you just got to go out there and start and shuffle and see what happens. I've been running on like a flatter route, which has helped so much. So I think if you're ever kind of feeling that way, really assess where you're running, how you're running, what you're doing, maybe check your running shoes and see what you can change to kind of feel a little bit better in that process. But slowing down on easy days will definitely help you in the long run. You're going to stay healthy and happier, and you're not going to have as many niggles pop up. You're probably not going to burn out. So after racing CIM, and I would even say like my life kind of changed a little bit, but I stopped running routinely or with any sort of like schedule like 2011 ish, 2012, and maybe 2010, because I think it was a 7-year break. So it would have been 2010. It's a long time ago. It's really tough to remember. But it is like, there is that like burnout factor, right? And after I ran CIM, I was so exhausted. I thought I worked out a lot, or I'm like, oh, running 6 days a week isn't going to be a problem because I work out 7 days a week. But like, obviously I didn't, because the schedule, like, you trick your mind to thinking something is true. And then I started running 6 days a week. I'm like, how am I going to fit this in? I'm like, well, clearly I didn't work out 7 days a week, because this wouldn't be a problem to fit it in if I did. Right. But there was that like burnout factor, and I like took some time off, and then obviously the pandemic hit like very shortly after that race, and then my life took a different like path. But slowing down on easy days is definitely going to make you have the choice to choose on when you stop running versus your body telling you when to stop running. All right, the second thing I would do if I were starting over as a runner is, you got it, fueling better. I like to call it gel well, gel often. And it's not just about the gels, but like the overall day of fueling. And this is a tough one, especially I think for females. I know all genders, all people, all humans can go through just issues around the fueling aspect. I'll also note some timestamps in the description box if you'd like to just fast forward through this section. This is like a triggering thing for you. I understand, and I'll be the description box will have like some good information on how to set you up for success and getting to the third thing that I would do if I was starting over as a runner. But fueling better is such a huge piece on how we feel as not only humans, athletes, but all of the above, right? And I think if you have gone through a stage where you weren't giving your body what it needed, maybe it was a season, maybe it was years. It was something I battled for a very, very long time. And I think I still do. I don't think it's something that's like completely gone, right? I think it's can maybe always be like something that pops up every now and again. But fueling well and fueling often is going to give your body and your mind the energy it needs to do what you want to do. So I would, in my 20s, when I started as a runner, maybe I should talk about when I started as a runner. And I started as a runner when I graduated from college in 2005. And I'm laughing because that feels like a very long time ago, everyone. And I think it actually was a long time ago. So there's that. But I got a job right out of college. Like I had a job as I was graduating, and it was an office job. And I was pretty active in college, like class study, but I was a nanny. The girls that I nannied, like they didn't have TV time, right? I was there to like play with them and help them and have fun, right? And And so we were always like doing things. And I remember like the first week of my real adult job, I thought, oh my gosh, this is awful. Like I have to sit in front of a computer for like 8 hours a day. Like this feels like a lot and without a lot of breaks, right? So I ended up getting a gym membership to a gym that was literally a block away from where I worked. It was an awesome gym in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's called MVP. If maybe you've heard of that brand, it's very similar to a Lifetime Fitness. And I started running, and I started running on a treadmill. I took classes. I would jump on the elliptical, the Stairmaster. Like I loved it all. I just loved to move. And my parents live next to this really cool trail on Lake Michigan that takes you essentially from their house to the lake, and it's through the trees. You go down the sand dunes. So it's man-made paths, but there's hills, there's stairs up and down, and it's a lot of fun. And I would run that in the summer, and sometimes I'd run like 2 loops or 3 loops. I think from my parents' house, like one loop was maybe a mile and a half. So it wasn't like long by any means. And people would always ask me, like, well, what are you training for? Because they'd see me like looping this thing. And I'm like, I'm not training for anything. I'm just like out here. And oh gosh, the energy I had as a 20-year-old is incredible. I wish I had more of it, but maybe you don't. So, anyways, that's how I started running. And I would never eat before a run if it was a morning run. Like, let's say it was a Saturday or a Sunday run. I wouldn't eat before my run. I would eat maybe after my run, but I would definitely have coffee, right? And I would typically run after work, and that served well for me through my 20s, like running after work, no big deal. And, I wouldn't fuel myself. I wouldn't eat enough throughout the day before going to the gym. Um, and it was a very like high protein, low carb diet sort of thing. Now, this is like mid 2000s. So you might be shaking your head yes. And that strategy doesn't work for someone who is moving often, moving a lot, and exerting a lot of energy through running. So I would typically run like 5 days every day, or 5 miles every day, and then maybe take like a strength class or do something else. And I would always add on to that. And it just simply wasn't enough. And looking back on it, it's like, I think you can get away with more in your 20s. And it wasn't necessarily a thing, but it became a thing because it was something that I continued to do, even during the time that I took off from running and then getting back into running. It was a thing until 2020 when I was running, and, under fueling is a stress. And when the pandemic hit, I was living in a brand new town to me, Boulder, brand new town. And I didn't really know anyone here. And I wasn't really working, and I was trying to build Elevate. And it was also a very scary time. The summer of 2020 was a very scary time, I think, for a lot of us, right? If you think back to that summer, you can really see people, and you were still, at least I was, Lysol wiping my groceries and, paranoid that every little cough or feeling fatigue was COVID, and who knew what that was going to mean for you, right? And that was really scary for me. I was very stressed and anxious about getting it, having family get it, and not being able to see my sister or really have any contact with friends and family, right? I think we can all agree that that was a really difficult time. So that was a lot of stress. Elevate was a lot of stress because there wasn't an Elevate, and I was trying to build it. Like, how do you build a business during the pandemic? Um, and then I was also trying to run, but I wasn't running with like any sort of fuel in my body. And very similar to blossom training, but for different reasons, it's like I can hold this very high amount of stress between Elevate. I think owning a business is always going to be stressful. I don't think there's ever going to be like, that's not going to change. Being your own like entrepreneur and It's wild. It is wild. It is very stressful. And so there's that. And then there's training stress. And then when another stress gets added into that mix, I can hold very high stress in like two of those categories. But like a third stressor, in this case, it was fueling, not for cherry blossom. That was a different stressor. But in this case, it was fueling. My body shut down. It was very similar, very, very similar to 2020, 2024. I felt like crap running. I didn't have any strength, or I would start out, in this case, I'd start out strong and then I would just get weaker and weaker throughout the workout. I think, and not slower, that's different, weaker. You just feel like I can't do this anymore. I want to stop. I can't run hard, or I can't complete this interval because it just feels so intense and my body is just like slowing down. So fueling your body better early on, as early as you can, is going to help you feel happier, stronger. It's going to keep your body healthy too. You're not going to be going to see doctors because of different things popping up. If you can't and don't fuel yourself well, then those niggles, the burnout, it's all going to happen. It's all going to happen. I ended up working with a sports dietitian. Her handle is sports dietitian Kelsey on Instagram in 2020. And we worked together on how to set up my running fueling. And we reconnected last year because I said my training is totally different now. And I need to know what to do because it's different and it's way more intense. It's way more. And I just feel like I need help with this. So it is something that once you get a handle on, it can be something that it works for a while. And then you might need help with it again, or you might need more direction because your training's different, right? So I was notorious for going out for runs without eating. So her suggestion was like starting with a banana, not a half a banana, a full banana, and then building from there. So, it's at a point now, 4 years later, where I can eat quite a bit in the morning. 2 pieces of toast or a bagel, a full banana, a bowl of oatmeal, a bowl of cereal, some yogurt, and go out and run, and I'm fine, right? Because I've trained my stomach, but it takes time. So you just slowly build in, you slowly work up. You want to have carbohydrates, a little bit of fat, not usually protein. Yogurt for me does work, which has protein in it, but you don't really want to be focusing on protein because you don't want to get stomach cramps. You really want to have easy digestible carbohydrates in your system. So you can do it that way, and then fueling on the back side of the run and making sure that you're taking a 3-to-1 carb to protein ratio after your run, 30 to 45 minutes at the very most. I know Megan Featherston, she's an awesome sports dietitian or registered dietitian, and she has shower shakes and putting a shower shake together and drinking that as you're taking a shower, like trying to get something into your body as quickly as possible to start the recovery process. And that's the biggest key, is the fueling not only helps you feel strong, helps you feel capable, confident, maybe even happy, right? Because I know I'm happier when I'm well fed. No one needs to see a hangry Sarah. It's not pretty. It creates just a better environment, right? And you feel better, and your energy throughout the day is going to be better. You're not going to get the slumps in the afternoon. And it's just such a huge win. But having that recovery process start immediately is only going to help you for the next session that you have, where you get to go out and have a workout and crush it. So it's also really important to take gels and electrolytes during the run. So I carry gels in pockets or my handheld that also contains water and electrolytes. I'm a big believer in taking a gel every 3 to 4 miles. Depending on the gel, it could be every 20 minutes, but everyone's going to be different. But I would say 4 miles at the most, and don't go over 4 miles. And hey, if you're not at this point, it's okay. Try it on your next run. See what happens. See how good you feel. And then it'll be like a momentum of a snowball effect. And you're just going to want to do more and more and more because you're just going to feel better and better and better. So the third thing I would do if I were starting over as a runner would be to start a strength training program. That's right. I started strength only a few years ago. I started resistance like Pilates. So it's Pilates on a reformer the summer of 2021. And so I guess it's been almost 3 years and I love it. It's so hard. It's the exact opposite of running in my mind, which is why I think it's so crucial for runners to do this, because when we think, let's say like track workouts or tempo workout, we're thinking fast, 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 right? We're fast with the intervals. We're fast with our cadence. It's go, 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 go. And it's intense, right? Well, reformer Pilates is like the exact opposite. It's very slow movements, very slow, like a very slow 4-count system where you count 4, 3, 2, 1. And that is one half of the move. And then you move back, right? In that same sequence. It's very, very, very slow. And so for me, it's a big mindset. It's not only like a physical training and I get stronger in this workout by breaking down all the little muscles and really breaking them down to fatigue. And the instructors are so great. They're like, oh, you must have had a long run or a workout today. Like they can tell when I'm like going into class pretty low, like pretty tired. And when I'm like, oh yeah, this is like a random day. Like if I go on a Monday, not random, it's strategic, but it's so good because your mind has to slow down. And it is one of the hardest things to do. And I think it builds mental strength, which is the second reason why I go. Like, I love how I feel after class. I love how it works to lengthen my muscles and feel really good. But it's also such a huge mindset win. And I'm like, if I can get through this 2-minute like center core or leg work exercise by doing that very slow 4-count process, if I can mentally wrap my head around that and get into that, how can I not push at the end of a marathon, right? Or in the last 5K of like just working hard to run 1 second faster per mile, right? Now there's other types of strength training, right? You can go to a gym, which is now what I'm also doing. So this came up a little over a year ago. It was at the very start of my Boston build where my coach was asking like, well, what exactly is Mecca, which is where I go for resistance Pilates, and what are the exercises that you're doing? So as soon as I explained to her what it was, she's like, great. Now I want you to also add in gym time. So going into the gym and lifting heavier, and there's not going to be as many reps, but it is heavier. And we're focusing on glutes, we're focusing on quads, we're focusing on calves, and we are focusing on those hamstrings. And every week I have 1 or 2 sessions where I get to go and do that. And it's such a nice balance because it does create a lot of power, which is what strength training does. So if we're not strength training and we're only running, chances are you're also getting hurt. So that's another reason that you can get hurt, right? This is the third thing I would do if I was starting over as a runner. And it's also the third thing that can actually create injuries if you're not doing it. So it does prevent injuries. It's injury preventative. It creates a lot of strength. It creates a lot of power. Your muscles are able to do more during the race, which is what we want, especially in a marathon, especially on a hilly marathon. And it helps so much, so much. Like I had some girls run Boston, and just the difference over year, or where they came from, like in their last marathon to Boston, year over year would be Boston to Boston, and just how much stronger they were this go around, even in the heat, which actually is a much harder to run through than the weather we had last year, which was cold, windy, and rainy. Like, I think that's so great. It's so powerful. I notice a difference when I'm very diligent in the strength training room and really I have no problem getting Mecca in, but getting like the strength training in. So, what does that look like? It doesn't have to be a lot, it can be a 30-minute session, but you want to think heavy. So, you want to think squats, you want to think deadlifts, single leg deadlifts, you want to think lunges, Bulgarian split squats, lateral lunges. There are so many different exercises that you can do to target all those four areas. Calf raises with weights, single leg calf raises. Like there's so many different calf raises you can do. And just developing a really strong lower body. I just got back into gym strength training over the weekend. I had my first Boulder 10K workout, which it took all week to figure out why I was running the workout I was on Saturday until Saturday morning. I had a 1K. I had 6 by 90 second hill repeats in South Boulder off this mega hill. It's about 0.23 I got in 90 seconds, and it had 60 feet of gain. So it's a hill. And then I had a 2K at what we were hoping was 10K, but now it's like, just run how you feel. And it took me all week to figure out why I was running hills. I was like, well, I guess maybe she thinks I need like the power and the strength for the summer. I don't really know. And then it dawned on me. I was like, oh, wait, you are running the Boulder 10K, which is a hilly 10K in Boulder on Memorial Day. I'm like, that's why you're running hills, Debbie. Like, come on. So hills can be part of a strength training routine too, to make and create that power, that strength. But I ended up running a very strong workout, which I was very, very excited about because it's been about, well, I can tell you it was March, pretty sure it was March 11th, such a special day for one reason, but not, oh, it was March 12th, was my last feel good day in running. And so I was really excited that this felt good. And then I ended up going in later in the day to do about an hour of strength from now. And I could feel it, right? I could feel it in my hips. I could feel it in my glutes, but that's great. Like you want to have a little bit of that soreness to know that you're working it and that you're getting stronger. And like with anything, just start out small. It's very, very tough if you're not used to it to just go in and try an hour. Like, start with 20 minutes if you want, start with 30 minutes, right? Working on the core is another great way to create a strong athlete and to create a strong runner. All right. So, the fourth thing I would do if I were starting over as a runner is follow a plan or hire a coach. So, maybe not hire a coach, right? Because I was in my 20s and I really didn't know what I was doing. And I just wanted to run. And it kind of goes back to like the first thing, right? Whether that's downloading one from the internet, the Elevate website has great training plans for just a few dollars when you factor it all in. Like, it can be for anyone, right? Having a strategy and kind of knowing and following a plan and knowing what you're doing really is helpful. And it's not just helpful to like race and PR. It creates habits, it creates systems, it creates consistency, and it creates a lot of good that you're going to need when you get to that point in your running where you say, I'm ready to hire a coach, or I'm ready to run a BQ, I'm ready to run my first marathon. Because if you jump in to following a plan and or hiring a coach at that point, it's what I did. It is a little bit of a wake-up call in some sense. Now, I loved it. I loved it. I still love it. I couldn't imagine not having a coach. And maybe it's because it's what I do all day, every day, and it's not something that I want to plan for myself. But I have to tell you, on Sunday afternoon, when I get my training plan for the week, it is like Christmas morning every single week for me. I love it. Love it. Even when I wasn't feeling well while running, I still loved it. And I think there's just so much value that comes from having a strategy, because ultimately, all those things I mentioned, it's going to keep you on track. The consistency, the habit forming, it's going to create some goals along the way. It's also going to keep you healthy, because how many of us, when we're younger, we're going out there, we're hitting the pavement hard, right? We're hitting the pavement hard, running everything super hard on no fuel, no strength training. What's going to happen? You're probably going to burn out or get injured, right? So if there's a plan that can be followed, and maybe it's a loose plan, maybe it's a free plan online or an Elevate plan that has some substance behind it, you can do that. And what I love so much about training plans that, you download, um, is that you get to move things around. Now you get to do that with a coach too, but there's another person involved. It takes energy, it takes time. But if you're following a PDF sheet or something that you created in Excel, you can move that around. And although that's not necessarily creating certain habits, what it is doing is it's creating a lot of flexibility with that runner. And that is something that we don't necessarily have as type A athletes, right? The flexibility isn't always there. I know I have a very difficult time with flexibility with my training. If it's on the schedule, I'm doing it. And I find a way to do it. And I think for Cherry Blossom, that was probably one of the things that did me in, is that I wasn't listening to my body enough, and I should have taken like an extra rest day or something, but I didn't. I can always justify the why. But if you hire a coach or follow a plan, it can have a lot of benefits to it. And I think there's also this misconception that only fast runners hire a coach or follow a plan, or only BQ or Boston qualifying athletes hire a coach or follow a plan, or only the elite runners or the OTQ, the Olympic time trial qualifiers, hire a coach or follow a plan. Not true. It's actually, I think, it's really the athletes and the runners who are just getting into the space, just getting into running, because you're like a sponge, right? Too, like that's part of it. You just want to like know all the things. And if you can start setting up the right patterns, the right consistency early on, it's probably going to curb some of those behaviors that we don't want to necessarily seep into running anyways. And there's just so much benefit to it. And it can be a place to learn and discover more about yourself. Obviously, like the strong running is going to happen, because that's just what happens when you start running. Like you just get faster and faster and faster. And hey, if you're not, like, order an inside tracker test and that'll help you. I'm going to be ordering one here soon, and I'll share my findings about it and see if we can maybe uncover some residual effects still in my body from cherry blossoms. So that'll be really cool. But having a strategy and not just, putting random workouts and random training plans or training workouts together, random weeks of training, maybe not taking down weeks, maybe taking too many down weeks, how many reps to run in workouts, what pace, how much time to take in between reps, I think is a big question that a lot of people have, and they don't necessarily know what the right answer is. Do I jog? Do I run hard in between reps? Do I do standing rest? I mean, everyone is so different. And there kind of is a purpose behind like standing rest versus a float versus like a harder effort in between. There's a strategic philosophy and reason between all three of those. So hiring a coach or following a plan is a great way to get on track early and to kind of make the most of it while you're young, which is, I think maybe one of the bigger reasons why I look back to think, oh gosh, I would do things differently if I was starting over as a runner, because, I would be at a different place maybe with my running right now. But I think it's also very true to be okay with where you are in the moment and know that if you're going to reach your goals, you're going to reach them anyways, whether you reach them at 29 or 49, right? You're going to reach them. So that's a cool thing to keep in mind. So the fifth thing I would do if I were starting over as a runner is be curious and study the elite runners because they're just like us. And I think it's really cool. They really are just like us. They have the same worries. They have the same fears. They have a higher degree of pain tolerance, and they're genetically, most of them, gifted, right? They can just run fast. They have good work ethic, right? But really study their running form. How do they show up? I remember last winter, my coach wasn't around last winter. Why is that? She was running the Boston Marathon, and she usually in the winter will go to like a warmer place to train because Boulder is so hit or miss with like how many training runs you can run outside versus the treadmill. And, when you get to the elite level, there is a certain pressure that we don't have as amateur runners. And a lot of them train because it's their job, it's their livelihood, it's how they make money. So training for Boston on a treadmill isn't going to cut it. They're going to go somewhere else where they can run outside and mimic the hills and get everything that they need to get to fulfill what they need to do as an elite athlete and as a pro athlete. So Nell wasn't at practice that much over last winter. But when she came back, the first thing she said to us at practice was, "Were you doing your drills when I was gone?" And she always looks at me because I'm the other running coach, although I'm the athlete, right? And I'm like, oh no, because we weren't. We were not. We were showing up, running a 3-mile warm up, doing a few stretches, doing our strides, our transition, and then getting into the workout. And most of that winter, we were running on the treadmill on Wednesdays because it seemed to be that it would always snow on Wednesdays. So we just kind of like looked around and we're like, no. And she was like, oh my gosh, you guys. She's like, I spend 20 minutes on drills every workout and before every run. And we're like, what? She's like, I just feel so much better if I spend a lot of time. It turns out I think elite runners, I shouldn't say she, I heard this from someone, whether it was her or one of her training partners, or maybe it was her dad, Rick Rojas, episode 100 of the Elevate Your Running podcast, a great episode. But I think it was Rick that talked about like an hour warm up. And it's true. I'm pretty sure they do that because she's spending 20 minutes on drills, right? Between the warm up miles, the stretches, the drills, and the strides. I bet it is close to an hour. And she's like, it just helps you feel so much better in the workout. So why wouldn't you do it? And I thought, oh, this is a learning moment because if Nell's doing drills for 20 minutes, like we should be spending more time doing drills. Like everyone should be, right? I mean, there's definitely like how much time do you have in a day? And a lot of us, I think maybe 99% of us don't have an hour to be spending on warm up or 20 minutes on drills, but you can still do the drills, right? So study the elites. What do they do? What does their running form look like? What are their outside of training and outside of running habits look like? What are they reading, right? That season, Nell had the Boston Marathon course on her computer screen. I think she did this for New York. She probably does this for every race. And she studies the course like all the time. It's not like I look at it once and I'm good. It's like the wallpaper on her computer. She's looking at it all the time and really studying it. When I ran the Chicago 5K last fall, I didn't have a kick in that race because the finish line like snuck up on me, and it was kind of weird the way it was set up because there was like a sign and a screen way past the finish line that made it look like that was the finish line, but it wasn't. And when I ran over the mat, I was like, oh crap. I just ran over the mat because I had my eyes set on the screen ahead, right? Like eyes ahead. And when I told her that, she's like, you got to study the course, Sarah, course recon. I'm like, come on, you got to know where the finish line is. And I'm like, well, it's like a 5K. Do I really? But you do, because that's what they do. They know where the turns are. They know where the finish line is. They know where the start line is. And it's not just that. They do a lot of mobility work. They hydrate really well. Um, they work on mindset and visualization. And I think if we can all take one thing from an elite and apply that into our training moving forward, like how much stronger we could be, right? They definitely lean into a ton of strength training. But really, it's all like the simple things that we should be doing, they do, like planks, core work, resistance bands, mobility, good recovery, Epsom salt baths, right? Stretching, dynamic drills, strides, right? A proper warm up. It's all the things we should be doing that a lot of times we kind of cut the corner because we're running late or we don't have time or we don't, let's get real, we don't make time. I'm guilty. Guilty too. I'm guilty of sin. Totally. I have completely, I would say over the last few months, just like dropped the ball in a lot of like little things that I used to do. So I get to get back into that. I think there's seasons for it. I think it can be really hard to keep that going year round. So maybe knowing when the right season or the most important season is to really lean into all that stuff. Obviously, giving yourself some grace too along the way will help as well. So, what are some things that I would do the same if I was starting over as a runner? I don't actually have this scripted out, but it came up at the very beginning of the episode, and I feel like this would be a really cool thing to list out. Maybe it's going to be a whole separate episode. But what I will say is the very first thing that came to mind was when I first started running like the 5 miles a day on the treadmill at the gym down the street from the office that I worked at. And I was running that summer when I was living at home, like running that trail I talked about to the beach and back. I got these bright orange Nike shoes. I'm pretty sure they were Pegasus, but I really have no idea. I had one pair of shoes. They were the bright orange Nike shoes, and I loved them. I still loved them. Obviously, I'm thinking about it like 20 years later. I can still remember them like sitting in my car, in my gym bag, going out for a run. And I think like what that symbolizes is like really just loving what you do, right? Like I loved those shoes. I thought they were so cool. It made me excited to run, but I also didn't need the shoes to be excited to run. But I remember thinking to myself when I went into that 2104 5K that summer, I wore those shoes and I thought these shoes make me fast. They're fire engine orange. These shoes are fire and they make me feel fast. And I think, hey, someone has to be your cheerleader, right? Someone has to be there saying, like, you can do this. And, that's where, a coach or a running group is a great, it's a great avenue for that. Instagram can be a great avenue for that, or social media. But hey, when it's 2005 and really none of that was like, Instagram wasn't around and Strava certainly wasn't around and Facebook wasn't designed for that. My Nike running shoes was the thing that told me I could do it. It was my inspiration. It was my motivation. So I think that's kind of cool. And it'd be really cool to hear from you on maybe what is that thing that is your motivator right now. Maybe it is a pair of your running shoes. Maybe it's Maybe it's like a tank that has a certain message on it, or maybe it's something, we've evolved since 2005. Maybe it's like a mantra or something that you tell yourself or you're journaling, whatever that is. I'd love to know what it is. I'd also love to know what you would do differently if you were starting over as a runner. I would love to know that. And maybe it's just one thing that you would do differently. And it'll just get the wheels to turn a little bit and to see like, well, what would I do differently? And am I currently doing it? And then where can I take it? So that's where we're going to end this week's episode. We're going to leave it on fire engine orange Nike shoes. If you're watching the video, I have the biggest smile on my face because those are great shoes. And the fun fact about all of that is they came out with that same color in the very first pair of the Nike 4%. Um, and that was the very first shoe. It came out in 2019. That was like all the hype. It didn't have like, it's not like the Alpha Fly or the Vaporfly that we know today. And it's what I wore for CIM. And I still have that pair of shoes in my closet. They are done, and done. Dunzo, but I can't give them up. It's probably because of that color. So here's to Nike. I hope you bring back that orange racing shoe, and all the good vibes that surround something as simple as that. So thank you everyone for listening today. I really appreciate you. I'd love to hear from you. If you could rate, subscribe to the podcast, that would be awesome on your listening platform. If you want to leave a review, even better. If you want to donate to the podcast, even better. And I'd also love to hear from you on things that you would do differently, or maybe that one thing that stands out in your mind of like, when I started running, I did that one thing really well. And that's really cool. So I hope you have a really great week. I pre-recorded a few episodes over the next few weeks as I'm traveling. So we have some really great content coming up, some really great podcasts. And I hope that you love them as much as I loved recording them. So have a great week.